the NSTIC, moving the broader market beyond the password. So if you could come in, grab a cup of coffee, and take your seat, we're going to start. Our moderator today is Mike Garcia from NIST.
So I don't know if my double mic is fine. Okay, good. Hello. I feel like I'm way too high on stage for the closeness of the chairs there, so not mic'd either. Good now? Okay. So thank you all for joining. My name is Mike Garcia. I'm the Deputy Director, it's a mouthful, the Deputy Director for the National Program Office to implement the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. You can qualify for my job if you can say all of that in one breath. That's about all it takes. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction on what the NSTIC is, if you don't already know, what we're trying to do, how it relates to trusted computing, why we're sitting here, but this is a panel, and I want to spend the most time I can having the panelists talk and me not talking. Unfortunately, we were going to have Phil Dunkelberger from Knock Knock Labs here, but he had an emergency at the last minute and had to change plans. So instead will just be Andy Tarbox and Joerg Borchert, who I will give a little bit more of an introduction to in just a few minutes. So, transition. Things you already know. Passwords cause problems. They're not very good, and yet we have many, many of them, and so does everyone else, and that's probably a suboptimal outcome. So there's also an issue with friction online. Consumers have to create accounts for all these sorts of things, and it turns out consumers actually hate creating accounts for all sorts of things, and they do a lot of abandoning web pages. So this can really, essentially, just cause things that we don't like when we work in the Department of Commerce like I do. And this is how much the World Economic Forum estimates that consumers don't like it. If trust were to be eroded online through various means of passwords stinking and other problems that we happen to have online, we could go from $2 trillion in online commerce to $1.5 trillion, or perhaps if we could improve the situation of trust online, we'd go up to $2.5 trillion. So this is a $1 trillion difference. So does trust online matter? Yeah, just a bit. Also things you probably already know.
Is that just saying that there's a 25%, trust has an impact on 25% of the, is that what you're...
Yeah, I mean, you can't just say, because you're not going from 100% trust to 0% trust, but essentially within a feasible range of people believing that they trust online transactions and transactions that could be online if there were better means for trust, that could result in $1 trillion difference globally, annually. So we've got this thing called the NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and this was the White House strategy to deal with this problem. The easiest way to say it is to deal with the fact that passwords are, in most situations, insufficient, and in other situations, entirely improper and inappropriate and problematic. Within the strategy, there are 4 guiding principles. So it's got to be privacy-enhancing and voluntary, got to be secure and resilient, got to be interoperable, and any sort of identity solutions have to be cost-effective and easy to use. All of this together means that we should have something we call an identity ecosystem. And that is an online environment where we can trust each other to do transactions. Now, that doesn't always mean you have to know exactly who everyone is. In fact, in many cases, it is very good to be a dog on the internet, and we want to preserve the possibility of being a dog on the internet when it makes sense. And when it makes sense for you to be able to say, no, really, I'm who I say I am, and more importantly, he's not me, those contexts are where we're still having a problem. Also things you probably already know. So we can have a foundation for real economic benefits if we have trusted identities. We can have improved privacy standards. We can have enhanced security. And if we build all that on doing trusted identities properly, we think that we can make an extremely large impact in all three of those. So, what and why? There's a marketplace for identity solutions. Most people don't realize it because they don't have a whole lot of choice. They're just kind of faced with whatever they're faced with on any given website. Some people in this space know a little better than that. There really is a marketplace. People are trying to sell solutions for identity. And some are very good, some are less good. But the uptake on many of them is not what we really believe it should be for most people in this space. So, we have this strategy that says the private sector needs to lead this effort. At least in the US and in a number of other countries, a government-led solution won't work. It's politically infeasible. And at least from our perspective in the NPO, if you were to have a solution that was government-run, a single solution, I think that greatly increases the chances of that solution getting broken in a very short period of time. And then you have to replace it for 300 million people. And that sounds like a really bad way to do things as well. So a diverse marketplace that's grounded in standards and has privacy principles built in, those are the sorts of things that we're looking for. So we believe the private sector is in the best position to do that, and we want to catalyze the marketplace. Government can serve as a convener and a facilitator and a catalyst, but can't run the program. So what are we doing? We're trying to convene the private sector, and we have the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, which is a private sector-led group. We provided some seed funding for the administration of that group. Essentially they're trying to adopt the standards. They're not a standards development organization, but adopt the standards, note where standards still need to be developed, adopt policies and guidelines for interoperability, and put this incredible mishmash of pieces into place so that we can have successful federated identities that also preserve privacy and meet appropriate standards for security. In terms of catalyzing the marketplace, we're supporting pilots. We awarded $9.2 million of pilots last September, and being September again, we hope to award some more pilots real soon. I actually decided to change this slide yesterday to say awards imminent. There was some hope that it could be today, but it is not. So it hopefully will be in the next handful of days, we'll be announcing what we think are a really exciting new set of pilots. And then the government is an early adopter. So while we can't... Well, we don't think that the government should provide a solution. We think that it should buy some solutions. And so we're using the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange as our main avenue for doing that to make it easier for government agencies to accept third-party credentials that could be government credentials, or more likely and hopefully, many of them will be commercial credentials. So, what can your organization do? Participate in the IDESG. You could be an early adopter, which the people in this room are not going to be are going to be fairly wise to the idea of good, trustworthy solutions. And give us our ideas. We want to hear from you. We want to know what we're doing wrong. We want to know what we're doing right. And we want to know what's out there so that we can talk about things that are good and are good solutions. So, one of the things we face is this issue of communities are just thinking very specifically and narrowly. So we have privacy groups that are only thinking that we need to improve privacy online. We have a lot of folks in the security community that thinks we just need to get security right. But it's not all about security, right? It's not all about building the perfect encryption set. It's not all about finding the perfect solution. What we really think the key is in the end, it's really about the market. It's about usability. It's about getting liability right. It's about getting privacy right, business models right. About getting interoperability right. We have to do all of these things, and we have to do them at the same time or very close to at the same time. So, what about trusted computing in the NSTIC? Sure, great, sounds good. The key that I have to remember as a guy from the government is that if this is actually a private sector-led strategy, we don't really get to pick. And we have to keep that in mind. We can't pick a solution. We don't get to, no matter how great of a solution is, we don't get to pick it. The three reasons are that the market decides. The second reason is that the market decides. And the third reason is that the market decides. So we could catalyze a marketplace, but the uptake and the long-term success of a marketplace comes from the market deciding. So, today we have a panel. We have two members on it. Joerg Borchert from Infineon is the VP for Chip and... oh, my phone locked now, so I need to open it up again.
And security.
And security. I see. Thank you. At Infineon. And is also the president and chairman of the Trusted Computing Group. And Andy Tarbox has told me that his introduction at Wave should be the guy without a title at Wave. So, all I want to do is hear these guys far more than I want to hear myself. And if you're anything like me, you agree. So, who are you and why are you here is where we'll start. And I will take a seat and we'll go from there.
You want to say? That's fine. So I'm Andy Tarbox at Wave. I've been around the smart card space for over 25 years. So I've been dealing with identity for a long, long time. We at Wave are totally wrapped around the trusted computing paradigm and believe device identity brings a very interesting solution to a piece of the NSTIC challenge. So we're involved with several of the pilots. We hope to be involved with what we hope are winners in the next few days of the next batch. Trusted computing gives us a really strong foundation for strong device identity, which is enough on many websites to log you in. For some websites and for some use cases, device identity is not enough, so you need more. So letting the family computer go into your 401k is okay for you, but not for your kids. So you really need a combination of user identity plus device identity. However, when you talk to people, and it was very interesting at RSA last year, people from one of the major financial services groups where you probably have your 401k, I asked the question, I said, do you need to survey your customers to find out if they're interested in device identity? And they said, no. We get emails every day from customers saying, we would only like these two computers to be able to log into our 401k. You got hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars sitting in your 401k. Wouldn't it be really nice to know that only these two computers or this computer and this cell phone are allowed access? Trusted computing can do that. The product that Wave has created, Nodes, extends that. So the challenge is, well, we have 1 billion devices out there, it's not ubiquitous. So what do we do with all the other things? You know, I happen to have an iPad, or I have an iPhone, or I have this old computer that doesn't have a TPM, or I bought the really cheap one at Walmart. What do I do? So the Wave Node product for device identity includes the trust scores. So depending on how tightly bound that identity is to the device, how much do we trust it? So the relying party, could be that financial services company, has a feeling for how bound that identity is to that particular device, because not all devices are created equal. And they can make a decision and say, okay, it's not that tightly bound, I need more. Or it's based on a TPM, and I can really trust that that is your device. It hasn't been, that cookie hasn't been moved to another machine. So that's the concept of Nodes, and it's a very exciting space. It's a very different paradigm from what we're traditionally used to, which is selling, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of software to an enterprise. Now we're pricing something that's sub-pennies, but looking at millions of transactions. So it's a very different paradigm. Very exciting, and has a lot of power. So we can extend this into device health and all the other things around trusted computing. So there's a lot of direction that it can expand to. Joerg?
Yeah, I totally agree that we have to look at user and device identity. And I like to take you a little bit on the path that was a group in Silicon Valley which met in 2011 and thought, okay, we have the device identity topic with the trusted computing group address, but the other side, the user side, the password side, was an open topic. So several companies got together. It was at that time Knock Knock Labs. They were not named like that. Lenovo, Authentic, PayPal, and Google. And some of these companies got bored, so there has been a change. But the fundamental issue was that out of that came the FIDO Alliance. And as I mentioned yesterday about trust and what's important for standards organizations, it's the same as FIDO. You have to have openness of standards, transparency, and diversity to establish this trust regarding the solution you propose. Underlying is public key cryptography. El Gamal was very instrumental to support that from the technical side. And the main topic of FIDO, what wants to be addressed, is the login problem, to make it for the user easier to do transactions. And this is in works, and there are two fundamental passes forward. And one is a universal authentication framework, UAF, under FIDO. And the other one is a universal second factor, or U2F solution. The U2F is basically a device, and it's nearer from a rollout perspective, and I'm talking now from an Infineon perspective, where a built-in browser is supported. And it simplifies the password problem because you have a second factor authentication. So with that said, the universal authentication framework is the holy grail of this standards organization. As we are participating in that, this one requires a lot of work. The other one probably has a faster time to market, and we'll see how we can help with this framework, also NIST challenges.
Great. So the IDSG and FIDO share a lot of the same members, NIST included. So they have in many ways overlapping missions, and we think that's a good thing. We actually think that it supports speed to market, while a lot of the policy framework is being developed in tandem with the IDSG. So, second, are consumers ready to move beyond the password?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just look at my personal experience of my now over 5-page list of username password combinations and go, it's on the top of my desk. It has to be, because there's so many sites that if you create complexity for your passwords, you have to write them down. Otherwise, you're really stupid and use the same password for everything. And neither plan is good. And it does. I mean, you look at it, you go to a site and they want you to fill out this whole form all over again. It's no better than a doctor's office. And so you say, I don't need that. I'll just go back to Amazon and buy it there. Why do I buy all this stuff at Amazon? It's easy. So, absolutely. The current model is terrible. So with device identity, all we do is click the button, and the probability of losing your USB token is surprisingly high. The probability of losing your laptop, significantly less, but not zero. But you kind of know when you lost your phone or your tablet or your laptop. I see that as a powerful piece to the puzzle. Now, do I want just my phone, touch my phone, you're into my bank account? No. I'd like more. So, whether it's biometrics or it's proof of knowledge, a PIN, a strong PIN, but the username password, it's broken.
Yeah, I fully agree. I had a personal experience actually here at the conference. I had to change my login password, and we have a policy as a company which requires at least 15-digit passwords with these symbols, with letters, and with numbers. And I mistyped it, and automatically the iPhone, which needs the same kind of password, tried to ping it. So bottom line, I was locked out after 3 successes or failures, and I called IT. And I thought, all right, they can fix that, and that they would have basically, as administrators, the ultimate access to passwords. I learned that our passwords overcame that because the administrators don't have access. It's automatically encrypted, is on a secure server, and they cannot do anything. So what was the remediation? They said, we send you out a new machine with FedEx, and then we can set you up. I said, folks, I have to return to California, so let it sit. So basically, I was not productive for 3 days so far. And it shows what these policies mean in real world. And we have to think about within the company, on one hand, to protect our IP, on the other hand, find solutions which avoid these kind of scenarios. So it's a very practical example. And also on the private side, you deal with so many passwords that you have different means as a consumer to deal with it. Having something which would be better than write it down, or makes it easier to access it in a secure way. I think there is a big need for that, and I think that's where these alliances, solutions to be found from these guys, from FIDO, is an important part.
I mean, it's kind of like hardware-based security when you have to wait for a new laptop, right?
Yeah.
It's practically the same. Obviously, that was a loaded question, and had either of the panelists said no, we would have ended the panel immediately. So fortunately, we can move on. So how does the organization think about usability? You see these big signs here. I say enterprise security, consumer simplicity. There's another one over there, just in case something's obstructing your view from the giant sign. And of course, I gave my 3 reasons of why the government doesn't get to pick what wins. So consumer simplicity is where the real uptake comes from, and solutions aren't going to get adopted if they don't. So how do your organizations think about simplicity? How do you build it in, and how does it affect the products that you develop?
So from our perspective, it really is all about that end user experience. So from an installation point of view, it's relatively simple. They click on a button. It does take a bit of time because where the machine has a TPM, first we have to discover it, then we have to turn it on because it was shipped turned off. Brilliant plan. We won't go there. Then we have to enable it, key it. There's this whole list of things that we have to do to get this up and running for the consumer. So it does take a little bit of time. And there's really no shortcuts around this. I mean, creating that first key takes time. You know, it's a big random number. But once the users created that put that piece of software on their device, in use, it's really simple. You click the button. It's like it's an OpenID compliant piece of code. Click that button, and you're in. And the neat thing is, it works on my Kindle. So, you know, it works on my iPhone. It works on my Dell laptop, and it works on my Kindle. I mean, you know, this is cool. All major browsers, you know, everything since Vista. We probably will backtrack and try to do XP. That may be a challenge. And it just works. Granted, we need a second factor in some cases, but for most websites, that's all you need is one good, solid, single factor.
I mean, we are not in the B2C business, so we try to keep security under the hood, make it interoperable, and make it basically invisible. The user experience has to be flawless, and I mean, the fundamental thing is they have to trust security, which we deliver, and that means rigorous security evaluations to establish this trust for our customers. We offer as a service, we talked about the keying problem or key generation problem. We have a certified process to inject keys directly at the wafer fab onto the chip, and the black box is sealed and gets them to the service provider who has this access to these keys. So let's make it as simple as possible to deploy. And I see, for example, the phone as a very, very good use case. I can foresee that micro SD cards can be the root of trust for universal second factor authentication. So I think the need is there, and I foresee deployment in the near future.
I think another thing that we did with Nodes in developing the business model is it's free to consumers. So the paradigm that we face today is that consumers expect a lot of things on the internet for free. So our model is designed where the relying party who wants this service is going to pay for it. But again, it's in this sub-penny pricing per transaction. So it's a very different model from what Wave has done in the past. So it's free to consumers, easy to use, one click, works.
So this is a really different model, right? So the what works about username and password, which is astounding that, you know, I've racked my brain to come up with something, is that it works on demand, right? So it looks like streaming video, right? Like I love streaming Netflix because I don't have to wait for a DVD. So this is a very similar problem in terms of retraining customers. So the expectation is now you have overhead of getting this thing working, and then much lower cost per transaction to go to any given website and authenticate. So how do you think about retraining consumers for that to be the new expectation, to want this overhead, realizing that it's going to pay off in the long run, something that consumers usually aren't very good at learning?
Well, I think the marketing model for any of the NSTIC is a combination of what I would call push and pull. So you need to get the relying parties on board as cost savings in many cases, because maintaining username, passwords, and all the support around it is actually expensive. So a different model that's less expensive has appealed to relying parties, or reduces phishing or a number of other issues. On the consumer side, it's got to be so simple that consumers are saying to the relying parties that they use, hey, add this to your website. I have like 6 sites that I use, and you still require username and password. Why don't you change? Support what I use. It's easier. Or I'm going to shop at Amazon. Well, if I'm Duluth Trading selling work clothes, and everybody's going to Amazon because it's easier, I'm going to make the change. It's a business decision. It's very simple. So, I think you have the push-pull. So you have to push it out to the relying parties to get their interest from a business perspective, and then consumers will help pull it through to a wider e-commerce market.
I have a question to you.
Let's do it. Free form here.
We have been in the endeavor to roll out the smart card or chip card to the banking market 15 years ago.
I knew this was coming.
And it's now seemed to happen. So
Right.
what do you think will be the time frame for a scheme like what you described? How long will it take to get deployed, to roll out, and
Right.
getting adopted?
So understand the basis.
Is it again 15
of
years?
this. Yes. Yeah. So understand the basis of the conversation that Joerg and I have known each other for a very long time. And I was responsible for smart cards for MasterCard globally. And, at this point, the EMV standard that we wrote in mid-90s is now at 1.4 billion cards worldwide, except for the U.S. And that was an issue of the business case. So the business case that worked for the rest of the world did not work for the U.S., and we should have foreseen that and come up with a slightly different model. That said, to your question, I think that the migration for consumers to a model away from username password is probably more like 4 or 5 years. I think once we have an effective solution, and we're not there yet, probably a year and a half away, it will roll very fast. So when I put together with a group of consultants the MasterCard business case to go to the global board in 1994, we forecast that it would take 15 years and $20 billion to migrate from magstripe to smart cards. And except for the US, we were exactly on target. Most people don't realize it took 10 years to migrate from the old zip-zap machines to magstripe. We knew smart cards would take just a little bit longer, but it was right on target. I've got a good feeling that 4 to 5 years is what it'll take to migrate away from username password. Once it happens, it rolls fast because generally speaking, there's nothing new to deploy. So whether the solution is device identity in a laptop or your cell phone or whatever, or it's a card issued by the post office, or whatever the solution is to identify yourself to the internet, it'll happen pretty fast once it starts to move.
On the record, Andy Tarbox, password's dead in 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, there you go.
So, what are the biggest challenges you're facing, given that time horizon?
I think the biggest challenge is getting the relying parties to the table. So other than FIDO, which we are in the process of joining as well,
How do you spell that? What is that organization?
FIDO.
FIDO.
Fast Identity Online.
The relying parties aren't part of the system yet, and they're the key, because they're the guys with the juice, they're the guys with the money. And they're the guys that have to implement whatever's implemented. So we've got to get them to the table. IDESG is a great concept. NIST is supporting it. They're not running it, and I think that's totally appropriate. But if the relying parties don't start showing up to the meetings, it's going to end. It just won't happen, because they're the key. So for the relying parties all go to FIDO, IDESG just goes away, and you have a bunch of people talking about privacy and how I shouldn't have to use my name to log into my bank account. Actually, I kind of like that concept. There are places where it's appropriate not to be private. But it's the key to me is the relying parties, because they're going to pay the bill. Somebody's got to pay the bill, you know. We saw it with interchange in the banking business. So the government regulated interchange, and now everybody pays $50 for a return check instead of paying higher interchange on transactions. I won't start down that path.
Yep. And we certainly in the National Program Office agree with that. Actually, I was telling Andy just a while ago, my boss, the program manager for the NSTIC NPO, has a T-shirt that he wore to an IDSG meeting that says, "Ain't no party like a relying party." It's true. These are the guys you got to get to the table. And one of the reasons we've been struggling with online identity for 20 years is because, it's hard to get relying parties to the table. They've got this internal cost center focus on identity management, and that model is very hard to break.
It has to be it's the chicken or egg. So it's got to be really easy for the consumers, like brain dead, stupid, easy. And it's got to be cheap for the relying party to recognize the value of a higher, more secure logon. So unless they're getting killed by fraud, and that's a big number, or they're losing trust. So I go back to the MasterCard days. At that time, we had $400 million in fraud, but it wasn't a big number because we were doing $500 billion. So you have to get the words right, the M, B, and T words, millions, billions, and trillions. So $400 million in fraud was not that much. And we charged almost all of it back to the merchant. So it actually didn't cost us anything. In fact, the banks made money at it because they had chargeback fees. Oh, wow. Making money on fraud. So you have to get the relying parties to understand that this is a better solution, but it can't cost very much. It's got to be really, really easy for the consumer and essentially really inexpensive for the merchant. And you have to make it up in volume.
Especially if you've already invested in the identity management infrastructure.
Right. Because you're going to have to migrate. So everybody's not going to jump off the username password. You still have to support that whole infrastructure while you migrate to the new infrastructure. So it's a strong paradigm to overcome in the relying parties.
Well, we went here a little bit already, but what happens next?
I think we keep plowing away, and obviously, independent of NSTIC, we're trying to move forward with those relying parties and trying to bring them to the table and move the ball forward as quickly as we can. The pilots are perfect because it creates enough grease on the tracks so that it's easier to do things. So the relying parties see this as an inexpensive way to try it, test it, does it work? I think the NSTIC concept, the way it's been set up, is perfect because it's a catalyst. So I experienced the access card in Australia. I was the lead technical guy in Australia for the national health card, which then got labeled as the national ID card, which is the third rail of politics in any country. And John Howard was thrown out of office, and that was part of the reason. That wasn't all of it, but that was part of it, is a national ID card becomes the third rail of politics. So the NSTIC PMO was stood up not to issue a national ID card. That would have killed it. But rather as a catalyst, an accelerator to make this happen. And that's what the pilots are doing. So you've got 5, which are now 4 because one ended, pilots, and a group more, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, to be announced imminently.
Phone's been vibrating over here, so it's possible. It's possible I could take my phone out and say, I don't know.
So you can do that right now?
No, you have to let Congress know first, otherwise they get mad at you and then you don't have pilots anymore the next year.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want that. So it's a catalyst. So the NSTIC PMO is exactly what we needed, and it was done actually the right way. So good job.
Yeah, it's on you guys now, right? We just passed the buck. It's great.
Right.
Joerg?
Yeah, we foresee, we're looking also forward to pilots, and the major form factor we like to see and drive is the mobile phone, because it's such a ubiquitous form factor which you carry around, and hopefully these pilots will be successful.
So that in itself is an interesting paradigm shift, right? The idea that the computing device itself is the form factor. You just call the mobile device the form factor, right? As opposed to like a smart card being a form factor that goes into the device that you do all your productive stuff on. So, I mean, is that the real shift right there? That we're no longer talking about standalone, any sort of standalone thing that is used for authentication?
No, I would say we have a variety of form factors. It's just the one which we choose to go forward first. I foresee that you have to have this variety of solutions, and they exist in parallel next to each other. So I take it just an example. You have to move forward with one thing first, right?
Yeah, consumers are going to use what they choose to use, whether it's a laptop, tablet, desktop, phone. You have to support it all.
Yeah.
And that's been core to our design, was how do we support it all? So we may talk about ARM processors and Trust Zone coming into smartphones. Go buy one today, okay? You can probably get a couple, but we need to support what's out there today. We can't wait for the market to shift, because that's 5 years.
Well, I would rather open the floor up to other people that may have questions. A couple have shouted already, which I highly encourage. So feel free to do so. I think it's a small enough crowd. We don't need mics or anything like that. So
one question I have earlier, Joerg referred to evaluations, and I presumed at that time you were talking about internal evaluations when you said rigorous security evaluations, or is there some kind of infrastructure being built to figure out how to?
So, sorry about that. My question really has to do with the concept of evaluations and how compliance for whatever standards evolve are going to be enforced or determined even. And whether you're currently doing it internally or whether there's something outside of your company that's looking at your solutions.
I mean, it depends. I mean, there are government programs where you definitely have to do the evaluations in private programs, take the rollout of the Europay MasterCard Visa. You have also to hit a certain security level. And with these pilots regarding online identity, there is no framework yet. This is where we are basically say to ourselves, we take the rigid hardware and build on it with partners the application. And so there is no framework yet. And I don't know if it's required. That has to be decided basically by the parties which we need at the table who are really driving the business case.
So there was an announcement, I don't know if it's an announcement, but a piece from the NPO this morning about the trust mark around NSTIC. It's a strong concept. So, we look for things when we're on the internet. Do we get the green bar? Okay. So, does that trust mark have value? Not today. Does the concept have value? Yeah, of course it does. So, we look for things as consumers to help build that trust. And so one of those could be the trust mark concept, which IDESG is kicking around at this point. And that's some of the value that IDESG brings to the table. And fortunately, the PMO has catalyzed that so that it stood it up to get it off the ground.
Yeah, I think a comment Andy made earlier speaks to this point about the bank knowing your name, right? So that is a context where if you're using a third-party credential, some sort of framework that's certified may be very useful, and it may even be worth paying for, because then you know, can I trust this credential? I can, because someone has certified it at a level that I know, that I've understood, and I've decided that I accept. And that certification may be somewhat expensive, at least a non-trivial expense. A lot of other applications where you can be a dog on the internet may not require some sort of third-party certification. It may be a self-attestation that, hey, I abide by these principles. Or if all you're really looking for is interoperability, the attestation or certification is in whether it worked or not. So if you can talk to each other, you're interoperable in a lot of the simpler applications. So one of the things the IDSG is throwing around in the trust framework and trust mark committee is how do we establish this sort of the analogy that's been going around is the beef grading system that USDA runs. How do I establish that this is a choice cut or this is a select cut, and when does it matter and in what ways, so that there is transparency? And maybe there need to be 10, it turns out if you look at the beef level system at USDA, there are like 15 different levels. And as a consumer, I had absolutely no idea there were 15 different levels. I only really care about a couple of them, whether I'm making a meatloaf or grilling a steak, right? So this is the same sort of idea, that there may be, from a technical perspective and from a policy perspective, maybe there will be 15 different levels of interoperability, of privacy standards, different types of certifications that matter on the industry side, that matter on the framework side of developing trust and deciding who you can trust. But on the consumer side, maybe there aren't. Maybe there are 2, maybe there are 3, maybe there's 1 that says stamp. We, whoever we is, think you're good. And if that brand comes to be trusted, then that's what branding is, right?
I thought it was pretty significant in your opening comments that, you seem to think that the trust question affects about 25% either way, right? So you either plus or minus 500 billion or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So that says a lot, because it says most people don't necessarily really, for what they're doing, care about.
Well, think about it. If there was a thing on NBC tomorrow morning on the Today Show announcing that there was this massive breach of eBay or Amazon or some Bank of America or whatever. Are you going to like log on and buy something? Well, maybe not. Maybe I'll just go to Walmart. You know, a huge breach, global breach, I mean, today, that could erode trust in e-commerce overnight.
I don't know. I mean, these huge breaches happen with some regularity. I mean, you know, Sony gets compromised. I mean, it's one after the other.
Exactly.
And I thought that was reflected in your numbers. I mean, you yourself made the comment that they were making money off fraud, right? So the consumer's not really impacted by it so much. So for most,
well, they are today. So Durbin changed the rules. So they didn't look to Australia. So Australia was a great model. So the federal government issued rules to lower interchange because it was going to reduce the cost to consumers. You know what happened? The banks charged the consumers more for other services to make up the revenue. The merchants didn't change the price at all. They kept the money because they lowered the interchange. And consumers wound up paying more. Not a good plan. But anyway, we did it too. So, you know, that's a trilateral scheme that, you know, was designed by the banks for the banks, which worked quite well. Fraud on the internet, fraud in e-commerce happens every day. We all know about phishing and everything else, and they're trying every way they can to steal the secrets. Using trusted computing, using other techniques, biometrics, other things that we know from the security side, where we have that expertise. We know that those numbers are so big that they're not going to breach it. Kevin could give you examples of how big those numbers are. They're huge. The probability of breaking that is almost impossible to imagine. Versus a password that's, you know, 8 characters long and looks a lot like your hometown, and the other 50 other places you used it as well. So the model fits. It's getting from here to there. It doesn't take many breaches to lose the confidence. That's the big concern. It's not only the money of identity theft. The real issue becomes trust. We lose the trust of the consumer, we lose e-commerce.
Yeah, so my secret is that I'm not a technologist, I'm actually an economist. And I try to hide that as much as I can in most venues, at least till the end of a session. You don't want to just think about it in terms of this case of like, am I still going to pay my utility bill online or not? It's about the additional frictions that you create. So even if the consumer doesn't lose out on a fraud transaction, if there's an additional friction there, maybe I'm less likely to purchase from some small website that, if there were a lot of trust online, I might be able to trust just because I have this credential that's a third-party credential, and I know if the IDP is willing to do business with this guy, then I should be okay with it too. If not, then I got to go somewhere else, and maybe that means I pay $2 more for my book. And if I pay $2 more for my book, that's $2 less I can spend elsewhere, and it's a reduced multiplier effect. And you didn't support the small business, so innovation is reduced, so on and so forth. And there are all sorts of economic multipliers that are involved in that, and so. You know, it spirals out of control very quickly in terms of the complexity, but these are the sort of things that matter. And so instead you turn back to instead of turning back to trusted brands in terms of knowing you can do things wherever you want online, you turn back to trusted brands of a few outlets that you're comfortable with. And that typically is going to result in lower overall economic output.
So let me be...
Sorry to nerd out on economics for a second.
That's okay, no, it's good. I like behavioral economics personally. That's one of my favorite topics. So, at the risk of being a downer, let's just say that the relying parties don't show up for NSTIC. What will be the vestigial remains of NSTIC? I mean, what will be out there that will have that will have been accomplished?
Well, I think actually that the worst, if you had asked this question 2 years ago, I would have said the worst case scenario is that it ends up looking like EOF and things like that. And we always use the analogy of Lucy yanking the football out from Charlie Brown, which the government's done a couple times. In fact, we're really talented at doing that. It turns out that's one of our inadvertent strengths. And we swore from the beginning we wouldn't do that this time. And so far, I think we've lived up to that. 2 years later, with F6 getting off the ground, I think the very worst case scenario is that you have government accepting third-party credentials. So at least the IDPs have this higher level of federation in terms of working with the government, and that's the worst case scenario, right? That's shut everything off right now, and NSTIC goes away aside from that. So that's actually a fairly reasonable outcome, given that that's something that government's been trying to do for 15 years. And being the worst case scenario, it's not terribly likely. I think you still find a higher level of federation. I think the biggest likely worst case scenario or bad case scenario is that I mentioned the four guiding principles is that something gets left behind. So I think we are very much moving in our way towards interoperability, right? And you see Facebook Connect is actually is the most successful federated login system. Many would, especially those in the privacy community, would cite its shortcomings. But we're seeing increased interoperability, right? We're seeing computing power reach a point where moving it to the commercial space and having ubiquitous higher security capabilities are fairly likely to occur. And of course, if they're not cost effective and easy to use, then they'll fail anyway. So we're likely to get there. Privacy, I think, there's a huge risk of leaving privacy behind, and that's one of the dangerous bad case scenarios that I think is unfortunately is more likely. So yeah, I think if the IDSG fails or the NSTIC NPO goes away, the bigger risk isn't that federated identity doesn't happen. It's that it gets implemented in a dumb way.
So I think you have a number of, on the one side we're saying we need the relying parties, and we do. On the other side, we have a lot of serious players that are playing in the space. From the IDP side, like Verizon's and LexisNexis, and some heavyweight players. Then you look at Fido with PayPal and Google, and they're all watching the NSTIC, if not participating or participating lightly. And then you have big financial services companies all hovering around. So the big banks all are watching really carefully, trying to see how the sea changes and settles, and the right spot to do a pilot. Because they all have the same issues. Fraud is expensive to the bank at the end. It's just, it's the erosion of trust.
I have one quick follow-up, and that
Yep.
is that I recall an effort in Europe called FinRead, and painfully, I recall FinRead. Because it seemed like such a wonderful idea. And the one problem was banks just didn't want to spend the dollars to get those FinRead things distributed, get the little readers distributed. So again, it's about these relying parties who aren't willing to step up and make
It's
the
like
investment.
it's like EMV. You have to create. EMV hasn't happened in the U.S. until now. It's happening now, finally. You have to create a compelling business case for whatever it is. You need to walk a mile in the other guy's shoes. You need to walk in the bank's shoes to understand what's their business case. What's that relying party's business case that's compelling? Okay?
Earlier you mentioned a couple of things that caught my attention. One of them is the political aversions to something like OpenID, Facebook Connect, which is largely related to privacy. And you're going to have about 30% of the population that doesn't trust the federal government to run an OpenID standard. You're going to have 30% that doesn't trust private industry, and you're going to have 30% who just don't care. How can we address, and I don't know if FIDO or IDSG does this, how can we address a framework that enforces some kind of a voluntary industry regulation with real penalties? So if you have a consortium of companies that are providing something like, back in the day it was OpenID, where you have Facebook Connect and everybody's getting behind this, can we work at a framework where the government says, we're not going to enforce a regulation provided you take care of this, but we're going to penalize you if you step outside of these regulations, and provide a long-term privacy guarantee, so that what's trustworthy today for privacy is going to be trustworthy 5 years down the road after they've collected all of this information, auditing information on what you've done, where you've been, who you are.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. There are a few different ways to answer it. I actually almost amended my earlier statement about privacy getting left behind, because I think there may even be a slightly worse case scenario than privacy getting left behind, which is that privacy gets left behind and something really bad happens, and we end up with, from a business perspective in terms of friction in the market, some very, very, very costly and poorly written privacy legislation, right? There's certainly precedent for that happening in other industries. So this is the self-regulatory argument, right? It's to say, okay, right now the U.S. doesn't have privacy laws that meet up to the FIPS, the Fair Information Practice Principles. If we as industry think that the writing is on the wall, that maybe one day something that we don't prefer would happen, well, maybe there's an opportunity for some sort of self-regulatory structure to develop a framework that says, I operate this way, it protects privacy this way, and that's better for the following reasons. I think that opportunity exists today, and I think that there are organizations out there that think along that path and say, some point something really bad is going to happen, as though it hasn't already, and we probably are better being in front of it. And I hope that's the case. I think that's economically, I think that's good. I think those sorts of self-regulatory structures tend to be more efficient and more effective than do bad things happening and reactionary measures. I would also say that sort of approach is actually fits well with the sorts of things that like the FTC is doing now. So if you look at like COPPA compliance for the FTC for children's privacy, the way the rules are written is that you have to meet a standard of care, and the standard of care is subjective in some ways. It's based on what the currently available technologies are. What is standard commercial practice? You better not be behind it. If you're behind it, you're out of compliance. So if technologies and solutions get deployed that are markedly better than today's current technologies, then we've just raised the tide, right? We've raised all boats. So now the expectation to meet current existing regulations has gone up. So this is another way without specifying what needs to be done precisely. You allow, if you can set a foundation, especially a standards basis that allows all boats to rise, you can set these sorts of expectations that, okay, meet the standard level of care, the commercially standard level of care that most folks out there can meet, and you're okay. And whenever you can support increasing that standard of care at an effective way, efficient way, then you continue to raise the level of privacy, the bar on privacy. So I think those are a couple different ways to think about it, but I think that they're both valid and they all happen at the same time.
Are we,
We are, in fact, over time by quite a bit, and I'm about to. I think someone's bringing in a hook. So
So, is there an official differentiation between privacy and anonymity? I mean, we talk about them, sometimes the context seems like at some point we're talking about anonymity, and at another point in time we're talking about privacy. So, but they're separate to me at least. And I thought Dershowitz did a pretty good job after the OJ thing talking about it. So, do we address that difference?
I'm not a privacy expert, so I don't want to make up things that aren't true. But at least the way I view it is that anonymity and pseudonymity are subsets of privacy as a whole. So I think it is being anonymous is a method by which privacy can be protected. And in some contexts, it's a very reasonable way. In some contexts, it's not a reasonable way. That doesn't mean that privacy isn't important in other ways. So can you limit personal information? That's part of privacy. Does that mean you're anonymous necessarily or pseudonymous? No. But if you are anonymous or pseudonymous, you ought to still be able to assert attributes about yourself in a meaningful way that can be trusted. So they are very much different things. The only solution to privacy is not anonymity or pseudonymity, but in some contexts it's the right one. Closing comments.
I think the opportunity is huge if we get it right. I think there's a lot of things pushing towards making it happen. It's not going to be 6 months. It's going to be 5 years.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well that there will be a deployment by the relying parties, and we have to find the foundation and standards and do trials and learn. And I agree with Annie.
I'm optimistic that they're optimistic.
That inspires optimism in all of us.
Case closed.
Thank you very much. Right now we have lunch being served in the corner, so please feel free to go over and start your lunch.